and welcome to Chapter 6, Learning Objectives 4 and 5. So this is the last learning objectives in Chapter 6 before your test. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Let's see, I think this is the one. I think it's this one. Let's just do that. Okay. All right, so in this particular chapter, we're going to talk about using those terms that we defined previously as tax levied and tax incident. Just to kind of recap, levied is who the lawmaker intended to impose the tax on. So this tells us what to do in the problem, okay? So tax levied will tell you how to approach these problems. Tax incident is who actually pays the tax, okay? And I think the easiest way to explain this is to use an example, okay? So this is a test type question. So suppose the government poses a tax on buyers of $30 per room. So the first thing that we want to do is to say, okay, who's the tax levied on? And in this case, the tax is levied on the buyers. Just like before, the first most important point to find is equilibrium. So we're going to go ahead and say this is going to be price equilibrium at 100 and quantity equilibrium at 100. Now what I want to do is give you the next slide. You might want to print this particular slide out, just this one, and or do a screenshot of it if you want. But here are the steps that we're going to use to find the new quantity with the tax, the price that buyers are actually going to pay, and the price that sellers are going to receive, as well as the incidence of the tax, meaning how is this tax apportioned between buyers and suppliers. Okay, so here's the steps. The first thing is, just like I just did a second ago, we're going to find price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. We're going to determine who the tax is levied on. So if it's levied on the buyers, we're going to subtract the tax from price equilibrium, like in the previous problem. If the tax, excuse me, is levied on the suppliers, we're going to add the tax to price equilibrium. We're then going to find a reference point. This is going to get a little confusing, but I think it'll make sense as I show it to you. And that's either along the line that connects quantity equilibrium to X, or we're going to make a line that extends up and make a reference point after we add the tax if it's levied on the supplier. Okay, keep the demand parallel to the first, and then we're going to shift that demand curve if it's levied on the buyer. If it's levied on the supplier, we're going to shift the supply curve. We're then going to find the new equilibrium with tax. We're going to draw a tax box. That's what this thing is right here, is a tax box. Again, this will make more sense in the upcoming illustration. The price that buyers pay. Okay, so this is easy to remember because buyers always come first, right? Customers always right. Okay. So when you draw this tax box, the price that buyers pay is always going to be on the top. The price the sellers receive is always going to be on the bottom. That doesn't change regardless of who the tax is levied on. And then the box itself will represent tax revenue. Okay, so hopefully 1 and 2 make sense at this point. 3 through 8 is probably very confusing, but I think will make sense once we do this illustration. Okay, so let's follow our steps. Suppose the government poses a tax on the buyers of $30 per room. So the first step, let's find price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. So this is price equilibrium at 100 and quantity equilibrium at 100. I always like to ask students at this point, is this market efficient? And your answer should be, yes, it's efficient. We can get to quantity equilibrium. So that's good. Now, what we want to do is find quantity, price the buyers pay, price that sellers receive, and the incidence of the tax. So let's walk through our steps, and I'm going to do this rather slowly because it is a little counterintuitive. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is subtract the tax. So the tax is $30. So I'm going to subtract the $30 tax from the 100, which is going to give me 70. I'm then going to follow this over and make a reference point right here. Okay. Now what I want to do is to, let's see if I can do this right. I try to draw a straight line. That's always fun. But there. Okay. So if I do this right. Okay, that's totally not right. This is fun. This is a hootenanny, isn't it? Okay, haven't been to a good hootenanny in a while. All right, so let me erase that. Let me just try to do it freehanded. I was going to try to use a straight edge, but totally doesn't work with my little thing here. Okay. I wish I could say that I do this better on a whiteboard, but I really don't. Okay, so what we're going to do now that we have this reference point, we're going to shift the demand curve inward and to the left. And we want to keep it parallel to the original demand-ish. God, that's so bad. All right, so let's call this demand with the tax. Okay. Now what we want to do is to find our new equilibrium. And because, again, I can't draw a straight line to save my life, evidently, our new equilibrium is right here. Okay. That's our new equilibrium. So the quantity with the tax is going to be right here. At this point, what we want to do is to draw a tax box. Okay. So the tax box is going to come over here to 80. We're going to go up. How far up do we go? We go up to the original demand curve and then follow it over. Okay, so here's our tax box in red. Remember that the price that buyers pay is always going to be on the top. So the price that buyers pay is going to be $110. The price that sellers receive is going to be on the bottom at 80. And the difference should be, obviously, the $30 tax. Okay. Excellent. Okay. So let's walk it through one more time. First, most important, in the front, in the beginning, we're going to put price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. Okay. Usually takes about 3 times to really kind of figure this out. It's levied on the buyers. So the next step we're going to do is to subtract our tax from the 100. Okay. So minus 30, which is going to end up over here at 70. We're going to move over and draw a reference point. Okay. Now, the only reason we subtract that is to get this reference point. I'm actually now going to just forget about that. And if you're working this at home on a sheet of paper, you might want to take those numbers off or just get rid of everything but the reference point. I think whiteboards are good to use sometimes because then you can just take out the stuff you don't need. Now we want to shift the demand curve inward, right? So that it passes through the reference point and remains parallel to the original demand. Okay, again, I suck at drawing a straight line. Okay, so this will be the demand with the tax. Okay. Now we want to draw a tax box. So we'll find our new equilibrium. I'm going to follow that over. And then we'll follow it up to the original demand. And we'll just kind of make a box here. Price that buyers pay is always on the top. Price that sellers receive is always on the bottom. So now we can answer the questions that were given to us. What's the new quantity? Well, if I follow this down, our quantity with the tax is 80. Okay. The price that buyers pay is equal to 110. the price that sellers receive is equal to 80. The tax incidence is how is this $30 apportioned to buyers and how is this $30 apportioned to sellers? Meaning, how is it divided between the two? Let's just go black. Okay, so if I look at the $30 tax here, okay, $10 of that tax, right? 110 minus 100. $10 of the tax is paid by buyers. And $20 of the tax, 80, 100 minus 80, just $20 of the tax is paid by sellers. Again, this should add up to your tax of $30. Okay, now what I want to say here is remember that we said in our couple of first objectives there that the more inelastic side of the market always pays a higher tax. To me, looking at this graph, it's difficult to tell which one, buyers or suppliers, is more inelastic than the other. But through tax incidence, I can definitely make the statement that I know that the sellers are the more inelastic side of the market. Why? Because they're paying a higher portion of the $30 tax. Okay. Now, the other thing I like to ask students at this point is once the tax is enacted, right, and we have this new quantity at 80, is the market efficient by economic standards? And the answer here is no. It is inefficient, okay? Because we can't get quantity equilibrium. And the reason we can't is this tax right here kind of puts a wedge into the graph. So it doesn't allow us to get to the quantity equilibrium of 100. Okay. All right, so here's our answer. Tax, right? Price the buyers pay always on the top, price sellers receive on the bottom, and there's our tax incidence, the $30, and how it's divided. We can say that sellers are the more inelastic side of the market because they are paying more of the tax. Okay, suppose the government imposes a tax on sellers of $30 per room. Okay, so now we're imposing it on sellers. Again, the first thing I'd like you to do is to find price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. This is exactly the same graph that you saw a moment ago, but now we're going to impose it on the sellers. Now, a little bit different. One thing I want to do is to extend, I'm going to make it jiggly here, extend this up from price equilibrium. So my first step is going to be to add the tax to price equilibrium. So 100 plus 30, right, is going to be 130. And I'm going to go over here and make a reference point. Again, I like to say get rid of that work because it might confuse you later on when you're trying to find the answers. So I'm going to just get rid of those marks, but I'm going to keep that reference point. Now what I'm going to do is shift the supply curve inward or up so that it passes, stays diagonal to itself, but passes through the reference point. Dang, look at that. Yay me. Okay, so this will be the supply with the tax. Okay, now what we want to do is find our new quantity equilibrium. So there's our new quantity equilibrium. And we're going to draw that tax box. We're going down this time to hit the original demand, well, to hit demand. And then we're pulling it over, right? Price the buyers pay is always on the top. price sellers receive is on the bottom. Okay, so there's our $30 tax wedge. So what is the quantity now with the tax? It's gonna be, it's like magic, so cool. All right, so the quantity with the tax is going to equal 80, right? Was 100. The price that buyers pay is going to be 110. The price sellers receive is going to be 80. Tax incidence. How is that tax divided amongst buyers and amongst suppliers? So if we look at this, we can say, okay, well, this amount here is 10 bucks. This amount here is 20 bucks. So the $10 is paid by buyers. And $20 is paid by sellers. Okay. Is this market efficient? No. Not with the tax, because we can no longer get to quantity equilibrium. So you might be asking yourself at this point, which you should be asking yourself at this point, it was the same, right? It did not matter who the tax was imposed on, buyers or suppliers. So let's see why that is. And this is the interesting, cool part about this, is remember that the tax incidence always falls to the more inelastic side of the market. When we did it with demand and imposed that tax, the apportionment was $10 to buyers, $10 to suppliers. And when we moved to the second example, we didn't change the graph at all. We didn't, change the elasticities. We did not make one curve steeper than the other. If we would have, then the incidence would have changed. But we didn't. We used the exact same graph. So what we want to draw from this idea is that it doesn't matter who the tax is imposed on, right? Because it'll always fall to the more inelastic side of the market. So if it's levied on the buyer or levied on the supplier, doesn't matter, because it's the elasticity of the supply and demand which determine the tax incidence. Now, this is the long way and it's the stupid way. Yeah, but I also now want to show you a short way. And after chapter 6, you can use a short way all the time. It's pretty awesome. And so let me show you the short way, and you're going to be like, why in the heck did you cloud my mind with the long way? Well, because I had to. I'm supposed to. Okay, so this is, again, we're going to start here. This is the short way, okay? You can use it as a double check if you want. So this is the price that buyers pay. And this is the price, quantity. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just slow down. Too much caffeine this morning. So it's not the price buyers pay, it's price equilibrium. And yeah, it kind of could be, but here's price equilibrium, all right? Quantity equilibrium. Now, for the short way, this is what I want you to do, is you take something like a line segment, and it's hard to do this in this venue, but you're going to take a $30 line segment. Here's our 2 rules about the short way. The line segment that you're choosing, so line segment equal to the tax. So I need a $30 line segment here. The line segment has to stay parallel, okay? And it has to, so kind of like this, we're doing a tax, I call it later on the tax wedge, okay? And it has to touch both demand and supply. So basically what we're doing is we're going right to draw on that tax box. So I'm just going to take a line segment. I'm going to do this in a very different color so that you can see it red. I think it would be very easy for you to see. So I'm going to plan on a line segment, and I'm going to say 100 to 70. That's a $30 line segment. And what I'm going to do is start, and I wish I could animate this, but I'm going to push that line segment in and adjust it. it has to pass through price equilibrium. I should probably put that in there. Has to pass through P sub B. Okay, so now I'm gonna like adjust this, kind of move it up. And so then I'm gonna say, okay, here. And then I'm gonna keep shoving it inward, shoving it inward, shoving it inward here. Okay. And then I keep shoving it inward. It's going to meet all of the things that it needs to. Now I'm touching demand and supply. I'm parallel, if I could draw a straight line. And this becomes my tax. Then what I can do is take this and go, let's draw our box. Here's the price that buyers pay. Here's the price sellers receive. So I got right to my answers very quickly. So you take a line segment and you keep shoving it in. I think I'm gonna do a video, an animated video for this. Keep shoving it in until it touches both demand and supply. Once it touches demand supply, passes through price equilibrium, you draw your tax box, connect it, price on top is price buyers pay, price down below is price sellers receive. In fact, I will do an animated thing for this if you can refer to it if you need it. Okay, so when we talk about this, we can tax the buyers, and we're going to subtract the tax, find the reference point, shift the curve. Or we can tax sellers. We're going to add the tax to price equilibrium, extend that up, get our reference point, and shift supply. This is the outcome of both of them. Remember, the tax incidence doesn't really matter as long as the graph itself doesn't change. So here, tax levied on sellers, again, what they've done is, can you see it? There's your tax. There's the price that buyers pay. There's the price that sellers receive. And you could have got there very quickly. And then you could have just drawn your supply with the tax after you put in your tax wedge. Okay. All right, so in looking at this, how does it affect our outcomes? And this is the biggest deal, is that buyers will pay more. If taxes on sellers, buyers pay more, sellers receive less. But that's true even if it's on the buyers, okay? It discourages market activity. Why do we say that? Because we can no longer get to price equilibrium. But we know that buyers and suppliers will share the burden of the tax or the incidence based upon their elasticity. Okay, that's the main takeaway from that one. I kind of skipped over, I shouldn't have. Sellers, okay. Again, we get a lower equilibrium price, lower quantity. Tax reduces the size of the market. Why? Because the quantity with the tax will be over here, whereas quantity equilibrium somewhere over here. So we say it's no longer efficient. Okay, so here's an example, tax on the buyers. Again, can you see the tax box there? And here's our tax box, right? So we have, what, 60 cents? 50 cents. 50 cents tax wedge. So there's our tax. Price the buyers pay is always on the top. Price sellers receive is on the bottom. Okay? And again, why is the market inefficient? Because the quantity with the tax is less than quantity equilibrium. So it's no longer efficient from an economic standpoint. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, I don't really want to say a lot about that. Okay, so elasticity determines tax incidence. That becomes pretty important. And I really want to make sure that you understand that. So remember, if we have an elastic supply, inelastic demand, who's going to pay more tax? Buyers. Why? Because we can pass the tax on to the buyer and they'll still buy the product. This might be things like what? Things with few substitutes, right? Things that are a necessity. Might be a short time horizon. All those things that we talked about. It might be a broad product category as opposed to a narrow. So if you're confused about elasticity, we want to go back and pick up chapter 5. Now, inelastic supply and elastic demand, we cannot pass that tax along. So suppliers are going to pay a higher burden of the tax. Why? Because there might be a lot of competition in this particular market. There might be many substitutes. There might be, this might be a luxury instead of a necessity. So that's kind of how we look at this. Okay. So again, just kind of reiterating that the tax burden always falls to the more inelastic side of the market. So here we have demand. Now remember, the flatter a curve, the more elastic it is. Okay, so the opposite, steeper the curve, the more inelastic. So let's just look at this. Try not to look over here at the tax or anything. If you look at the blue line and the red line only, which one's steeper? Demand, right? So now we know they're going to pay a higher incidence of the tax. Higher tax burden, higher tax incidence. Well, here's our tax, right? Let's take a look at it. Price buyers pay is up here. Price sellers receive is down here. So let's see how it's apportioned and say, well, are the buyers really going to be the ones that pay the higher burden of the tax? Well, if this whole thing is the tax, right? Buyers are going to pay this amount. Sellers are going to pay a much smaller amount. Okay, because supply is more elastic than demand. So buyers, demand, are paying the more tax incidence here, or the higher tax burden. Here, supply and demand, I don't know. I would have trouble kind of figuring this out. So if you have trouble figuring it out, use your tax wedge. Shove the tax wedge in there. Find your original price equilibrium. Price buyers pay is on the top, price sellers receive is on the bottom. Now you can actually use this tool to kind of determine which side is more inelastic. So here we see that buyers are just paying a small amount of the tax. Sellers are paying a large amount of the tax. So we can say easily the supply is more inelastic, right? And so the incidence of tax force falls more heavily on the suppliers. Okay, so now we want to look at a real life scenario. And this is a luxury tax, right? In 1990, Congress adopted a new luxury tax on, like really expensive stuff. And they said, this makes sense because truthfully, the tax levy does make sense. If you're able to have a private plane and expensive cars and all of these things, then you should pay taxes on it, right? And we're talking per unit, not income tax with everything going on. So just FYI. Okay. So what do we know about luxuries? We know that luxuries are inelastic or elastic. They are elastic, right? Because you can go without them. And because they're elastic, then we would assume that demand is very inelastic. So therefore, the buyers will pay a higher burden of the tax. And I'm going to put a question mark. All right. Well, let's look at this for a moment. Yeah, I want to draw it out. Okay. So let's go ahead and draw it out. So here we have quantity and price, yachts. You can tell I don't own a yacht because I always have to remember how to spell it. Spelling not my strong point. Math till the day is long. Okay. So we're saying that demand is very elastic. So let's draw a really elastic demand curve. So really flat, right? So that's going to be our demand curve. Our supply curve is going to be less elastic or inelastic. So let me see if I can do this. Okay. So here's our supply curve for yachts. Here's our price equilibrium. Here's our quantity equilibrium. I dare say the tax on yachts is pretty big that they passed. I don't know exactly how much it is, but so what I'm going to do is plan a pretty big tax wedge. I'm going to put it out here because I don't want to confuse you, but let's say that's my line segment that I'm going to start shoving in here, right? So when I shove it in here, I want to draw it about the same. Let's just say it's there. The price the buyers pay is on the top. Price that sellers receive is on the bottom. And here is our quantity with the tax. So although we thought it was a good idea to impose a really big tax on this, who's paying most of it? Suppliers, right? And suppliers, I don't know if every supply person who makes yachts owns a yacht. I don't know. But I do know that the people that supply yachts employ people, right? So the tax was originally supposed to be on the buyers, right? Because they can afford these yachts and all this kind of stuff. However, it falls more heavily on those that are employing people and creating jobs, right? Because you can see by the tax incidence. Why? Because sellers are more inelastic than buyers in this instance, right? Because this is a luxury. So therefore, the higher tax incidence falls on yacht suppliers who create jobs, who maybe just, we can go on and on. I don't know if everybody that makes yachts can afford one. Not sure. I know sometimes car dealerships, the people that actually own them are struggling, okay? Especially if we're talking about times like now in luxury items. Just as a side note, Tiffany's, is thinking about declaring bankruptcy. So when we talk about jewelry and Tiffany's, people, I guess during COVID, aren't buying jewelry. And I got to thinking about this, and I thought, well, no kidding, right? Because I don't go anywhere, right? I go nowhere, and I'm not going to buy jewelry. I barely put on makeup. It's a good thing I don't have pajamas on. You know what I'm saying? Okay. All right. So the outcome, largely on the suppliers. And in 1993, we figured out this wasn't working, and most luxury taxes were repealed. Okay. So hopefully this gives you a good idea about how we put this all together. I'm sorry I had to show you the long way and muddy up a little bit of your brain with that, but after this chapter, you can always use the easy way. In 7 and 8, we're going to revisit this and look at it a little bit differently about willingness to pay and ability to pay. And we're going to talk about what happens in taxes again in 8 and how it affects the market in terms of good feelings, if you will, or the utility that we get from product or service. So go ahead, prepare for test 2. And I am going to make an animated video, nothing fun. Well, maybe fun. Okay. That shows this tax wedge being pushed in. So thanks for your time and attention. Have a great day.